We are back. The season is almost here, and it is time for Inside Coverage, where we give you the why and the how of all things across the NFL. Jori Epstein and Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz. We're hanging out with you. Jori, you've been on a training camp tour. We're going to talk about it in a minute, but first and foremost, have you gotten any rest? Like, every time I see the amount of work that you're churning out, I just wonder, is Jori getting any sleep?
Well, thanks so much, Fitz. I appreciate that. I would say, in the last couple of years, I started to realize, I'm a better functioning human with sleep. So I get some, but I am very happy to be home. As I was telling y'all before we started recording, trip was super productive. I hit 14 teams during training camp, another 3 in OTAs. So I hit over half the league over the course of the summer. And yet, it was time to eat home-cooked food again. It was time to be able to, exercise on a regular basis, do all the things for more than, 15 minutes. So, very happy to be home.
Frank, I don't know. I feel like you and I are the two lazy kids in the class waiting for the group project where Jori's going to come in and lift us all. Because you and I, I'm just going to be honest, we haven't been working nearly that hard.
I wonder if our collective GPAs, me and you, Fitz, were higher or lower than Jori's through school. I'm guessing lower. Much lower, actually. The funny thing, Jori, talking about sleep and whatnot, I think it was Sean McVay. I was randomly watching some interview with him. And, Sean McVay was famous for I'm going to get up at 2 a.m. and beat everybody to the facility. Sean McVay recently said, screw that. Sleep is actually good. It's funny because all these coaches are so proud of the fact they never ever sleep, where it's you know what? Getting an hour of sleep a night probably doesn't make you sharp on game day. So sleep is actually good for you. A lot of us are learning, and hopefully more NFL coaches learn that too.
I had a friend tell me that I had to stop thinking about sleep as the end of my day and start thinking about it as the beginning of my preparation for the next day. And that was super helpful. But in terms of the work, anyone who is consuming Yahoo content in any degree of anything knows that Frank routinely is cranking out a gazillion stories with so much depth from all over the league, and they're usually accompanied by a Fitz video on legitimately everything. So come on, please.
Yeah, I want to see how deep Fitz can go into the sporting world on some of these videos, because I'll see something. I'll be like, Fitz, you're talking about synchronized swimming or whatever. It was
give me a day, baby.
Impressive.
Give me a day. You give me one day and a phone, and I'll just start working it. By the end of it, I'll feel like I'm an expert on synchronized swimming. I think Frank and I should start competing for the next Olympics. Okay.
Why not?
You mentioned losing sleep. Cowboys fans have been losing sleep. Look at that transition for months, trying to figure out what in the hell is going on with CeeDee Lamb. So speaking of those videos, I'm driving around. I get a text from one of our bosses that says, "Hey, can you get us a video on the CeeDee thing?" And I said, "What CeeDee thing?" Only to find out that our own Jori breaks the news. CeeDee, 4 years, $136 million, $100 million guaranteed. Jori, I'm not going to ask if you're surprised. I'm going to ask, in this process, did it go down the way you thought it would?
I think the only surprising thing to me was, by my expectation, this deal is done early, because I was there all through the Ezekiel Elliott negotiation several years back, where they took it down to the Wednesday before the regular season. I mean, there was game plan practices going on. Zeke had held out for 40 days. He was in Cabo for training camp. And then all of a sudden we're at the building. They're getting ready for week 1. And Zeke is back in the building because he had just gotten a deal done. And so in some ways, that's good that the Cowboys got the deal done now, so CeeDee can practice for 2 weeks with the team rather than 1, which, by the way, I think receivers probably need less of that type of practice for a quarterback that they've been with for all that time than a running back who's trying to get used to running with the offensive line. I will say, though, this is what CeeDee wanted all along. This is what the Cowboys knew was going to happen all along. So the fact that he missed all of training camp is a little bit silly. And if there had been something like, hey, the Jamar Chase deal got done yesterday and after CeeDee got done, then I think we could give the Cowboys a little more grace for pushing this off so long, because there would have been some degree of a new data point. There was no new data point. CeeDee didn't budge to his credit. And that said, I think this was a win-win, because I think this is a win for CeeDee, who now becomes he gets $34 million a year. He's making $100 million guaranteed. That's Kirk Cousins type money right now. And he is making more than any non-quarterback other than Justin Jefferson. And Justin Jefferson is playing on a team that is not paying a quarterback the way that the Cowboys are paying Dak, whether or not they extend Dak. They're already paying him a salary that is about $40 million a year. The Cowboys win because they didn't beat the Justin Jefferson deal. Like, they got CeeDee below that, which if you're trying to retain Dak and Micah Parsons, which we will get to more in a minute, it's a really big deal to have that at 34 versus 36, and also to have sort of like okay, he had a year left and now you add 4, there's a little more cap flexibility.
Yes, a lot of that, all that's true. It just seems like a fair deal for both sides. It's a deal that could have got done a while ago, but whatever. CeeDee will be fine week 1. There's enough time for him to ramp up. But I think we just need to ping pong it back, because the big story here is not just CeeDee Lamb coming in, because now that's done. It's what happens next to the next 2 guys. Because the question the whole time has been, the Cowboys really can't sign all 3 of these guys, can they? And I'll throw it to you, Jori, and just ask, can the Cowboys re-sign all 3 of these guys? Are all 3 of these guys going to be with Dallas in 2025, 2026?
I think they can. The question is, will they? And so I will say, I talked to Stephen Jones, their executive vice president, about this when I visited the Cowboys during training camp. And I was like, you faced something similar with Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, and Ezekiel Elliott several years back. What can you learn from it? And he's like, look, we got it done then. Maybe not in the timeline everyone wanted, but if we got it done then, we can get it done now. And there is, like, as much as the Cowboys took a lot of flack for not being all in this offseason, they, in theory, left themselves that cap flexibility that they can do it. Micah Parsons is not yet really pushing for negotiation this offseason. I expect that to pick up next year. That's what Steven told me, that he's not, like, super urgent for it this year. He's still got the final year of his deal as well as the 5th-year option after that. Dak is really the big question, and I wrote about this week, but I think that the issue is not only do the Cowboys want Dak, it's does Dak want the Cowboys? And I have a theory, and again, I've been wrong many times before, but I have a theory that I don't know that Dak wants this deal done before the season, because right now he can get a deal. He could probably be paid handsomely. He could probably have a little more security. The last time he went into this contract year, he had this gruesome ankle injury where the bone was poking through his skin, and he still got $40 million a year. And what has he done since then? He's improved as a quarterback. He was second in MVP voting last year. Now, granted, he knows, and I talked to him about this, like, his playoff resume is not what he wants it to be. It's not what the Cowboys want it to be. And I understand that is a reasonable knock on him and the biggest one there is. But from, like, an individual standpoint, he has grown since then. And so then if you're Dak, you have to ask yourselves, do you want to just know now, which, by the way, like, it's kind of unclear, like, can this team get over the hump? Or do you want to take this to the spring when Dak has a no tag, no trade clause, and he will have the opportunity to test the market? He can still come back to Dallas if he wants. In my opinion, he'll still have a lot of leverage with Dallas because they don't have a great next option. The likelihood of them picking high in the draft, which, by the way, like, what kind of quarterback class are we really looking at next year, is not so high. And then on top of that, like, okay, Trey Lance did not show he was ready this preseason. The Cowboys need Dak. And so I think, and again, I have Dak on the record saying this to us, is like, he says, I'm free and I'm not in a rush to get this done. I also he understands that, like, even the Peyton Mannings and Tom Brady's of the world, who he's not comparing himself to in terms of accomplishments, but even they finished their careers with other teams. And so I do think that Dak has comfort with going into this uncertain season.
So, y'all, like, there's a phrase my mom used to use. She always used to say it. My mom used to say, somebody pissed in my Wheaties. I don't know where the phrase comes from, but it just means I'm saucy. And I'm going to be honest, I'm saucy this morning. I'm just going to declare that right now, because all I keep thinking about with this Cowboys thing is I'm exhausted by the fact that we do this over and over and over again. Everything that Jori just mentioned is so important to the context, because at the time I was sitting on national radio every day as everybody was yelling, oh, the Zeke deal is not going to get done, and it got done. Then everybody was yelling, well, Dak deal, I mean, the Cowboys don't really believe in him, which, if you listen to real reporters, was never the case. The Cowboys wanted more time on the deal, not less time on the deal. It was just complicated, and the Cowboys do things slowly. How many times are the Cowboys going to take their time doing what they do before we realize that's simply how they do business, and we shut up about it? Like, CeeDee was never going to go anywhere else. Guess what? Mike is not going to go anywhere else, and Dak is going to decide if he wants to go somewhere else. Sure, I'll give you that all day long. But if the Cowboys want to keep him, they'll do it, and they'll do it on their time. And we'll sit here and we'll speculate like we're watching the Real Housewives of Dallas. We are not. We are watching an organization that does business this way every single time. So maybe the Cowboys aren't the problem. Maybe we're all the problem for yelling about the Cowboys instead of taking the context of how they constantly do business into account when we talk about their contracts.
Yeah, I agree with that. And here, well, agreeing with everything Jori said, we have to look back. Free agency started in 1993. So we have about, 31 years we're looking at. And those 31 years, a quarterback of prime age, not dealing with an injury, how many have hit free agency? The answer is still one. It was Kirk Cousins. That's it. So if Dak does hit free agency, that's why I'm fascinated by it. If Dak does decide, you know what, I just don't want to be Cowboys quarterback anymore. This is just not what I want to do. He would be the second. It just doesn't happen. Teams pay quarterbacks, or they're coming off injury, or they're washed up, or not washed up in Tom Brady's case, but he was 40. He wasn't a prime age. It just doesn't happen where a guy of Dak's age and his ability hits free agency. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Cowboys are going to end up giving him one of those back in the day, Alex Rodriguez to the Rangers type of deals where everybody in the NFL decides, oh, wow, okay, we went a little too far there. I seriously think he's going to get $65 million a year from the Cowboys. And that's going to end
65.
65.
Not 60, 65.
I believe that it's going to jump from 60 to 65, just because the Cowboys are going to realize if this guy hits free agency, we have no control over this anymore. So whether Dak deserves that or not is up to speculation. But I think it's going to be one of those deals where the rest of the NFL, almost like the Deshaun Watson deal, where they just say that was too much, and nobody's going to go to 66 the next year.
But Frank,
right?
I think it's going to take Deshaun Watson guarantees, because because Frank, as you point out, the Cowboys can offer anything. But I'll go back to what Jori pointed out. He knows he controls his own destiny. So even if they offer him 65, you mean his agent's not going to say, well, I mean, if the Cowboys are paying you 65, what will the Giants pay you in a year? What will the Raiders pay you in a year? And how much of it will be fully guaranteed? Like, I just think Dak is in this weird spot where he's going to get to do whatever he wants. And I'll then tie that back to what I said a minute ago, Jori, because to me, if we know that Dak really controls this conversation, then we just need to stop talking about the Cowboys side of it. I know we never will, but realistically, I don't think there's anything the Cowboys are going to offer Dak that's suddenly going to make him feel like he shouldn't test the open market if that's what he wants to do. So, like, maybe we just need to all, to use another quarterback, RELAX, relax about it, let Dak make his decision. But I think somebody's going to back up the Brinks truck and give him a fully guaranteed Deshaun Watson. Every dollar of this will be paid out to you no matter what contract, because that's what it's going to take to get yourself a quarterback. And guess what? Having Dak is better than having Daniel Jones. Having Dak is better than having Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. Like, having Dak still has value to some franchises.
Yeah, it's also interesting because when you said getting the Deshaun Watson money, my first thought was just the amount of the guarantees, not the degree to which it was guaranteed. And when I look at it, like, Deshaun Watson got $230 million in guarantees. Well, Joe Burrow got $219. Now, it wasn't a fully guaranteed contract. It was $219 out of the $275. But, like, the values of contracts are approaching what Deshaun was doing. Now, I also don't think people look at the Browns contract with Deshaun Watson and say, I want to do that. That worked out really well for them. I think what's interesting for Dak and the Cowboys also is this question of, what's the likelihood they win a Super Bowl together? Because while Dak does need to take accountability for not having his best games against some of the hardest teams and not having his best games in the playoffs, the Cowboys' playoff drought predates Dak by decades. I mean, this is something where we're going back to the 1995 season. And so, I mean, I did some research on, yes, there are quarterbacks who have been with a team for 8 years and then made it to the Super Bowl after. It's pretty rare, but I do think that there's this question that the Cowboys and Dak are going to have to ask themselves, which is, if our goal is to win a Super Bowl, are we more likely to win it together or separately? If you're Dak, like, I don't think you can knock the Cowboys for building a roster. Dak has had competitive rosters most of the 8 years he's starting. He's now going into year 9, and I would say he still has a competitive roster. But there is a lot of BS surrounding the Cowboys. And there was a player I saw in my training camp and offseason tour this year who was with the Cowboys and is no longer. And he goes, it's just football here. Like, it's just football. And I'm like, yeah, you no longer have the entire, like, Dr. Pepper Keurig headquarters overlooking your practice field. You no longer have tours routinely going through your facility. You no longer have a team owner who is on the radio twice a week and talking after the game, and his son is also on the radio twice a week. Like, and I'm not saying all of that means you can't win a Super Bowl, but there is a lot of distraction. And so I think Dak will have to ask himself, like, what do I want now that I am in a different personal chapter of my life, now that he is a father, now that he is with a partner, his family's in Dallas, but does he want to be there for the next stage of his career? And while I do know that money talks, and I'm not saying that the money is not relevant at all, he has been paid before. And so I think that there could be multiple considerations, not only the money, like a guy who's never had that big contract.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to make it too, that Dak's leverage here is that he's already been paid. This is really his second big contract extension. Because a lot of these guys who are signing, look at, you got the Herberts, the Burrows, the Lawrences, they don't have that financial stability yet. Dak has a financial stability where he says, I could play this thing out. If the worst happens and I never get another contract again, I'm still set for life. So that's his leverage. The Cowboys can't go to him with some, hey, set yourself up financially for the rest of your life. Dak will say, I already am, guys. I'm just waiting. Just waiting to set some records right now. And that's why I do think the Cowboys have to completely overpay him to make sure he doesn't hit the open market.
There is an element to, and this message is not just to the Cowboys, it's also to Cowboys fans. Because every time we clip something off about the Cowboys and I say something glowing about Dak, I get all these people in my mentions that are telling me I'm an idiot and Dak can't get it done. Okay. Cool. You don't think Dak can get it done. What's your plan B? And don't tell me Cooper Rush. Like, if your plan B is Cooper Rush, just don't press send on the tweet. Like, at some point, what everybody forgets is that you get stuck in this path where you're like, well, this isn't good enough. And then all of a sudden, you want change. I lived it. I'm not saying that Derek Carr is on the same plane that Dak Prescott is. I don't think he is. But certainly, life was easier as a Raiders fan with Derek Carr than it is not having any damn idea who your quarterback's going to be week in and week out. And I think what the Cowboys don't have an answer to, like, it's much easier to split up with somebody if you've already found who you want to date next. Like, there has to be some, what is the next solution? And everybody sits here and says, well, Romo to Dak. Like, they're taking for granted what it means to have a quarterback. I would warn you, that's the same exact thing Patriots fans thought when they got Mac Jones. And they're like, doesn't matter. We got Mac Jones. We don't need Tom Brady. How'd that work for you? Like, this concept that you can just get rid of Dak and suddenly you're still going to be the Dallas Cowboys forgives the fact that you still need a quarterback that can play at the highest level to win in the modern NFL. And last time I checked, Trey Lance ain't him. So I don't think the Cowboys have any other option. Like, you got to overpay, because if you decide you can't win a Super Bowl together, are you winning a Super Bowl with whatever random quarterback you hope you score on in the draft? Like, this is a failed process the entire way. I'm fired up about the Cowboys today.
The conversation about Dak is the craziest thing in sports right now, even crazier than the never-ending LeBron versus Jordan thing. It is people out there. There are people out there, I hear from them, who think Dak stinks. Like, who think Dak is like not even a backup quarterback in the NFL. Like, he should be out of the league. He's so bad. And every time I hear stuff like this, I'm like, I don't really need to listen to your opinion anymore, because you don't know what you're talking about. Dak is a very, very, very good football player, but people act like he's just trash. I don't get it. I don't understand why people have freaked out so bad about Dak Prescott, who is clearly a very, very good quarterback, but people talk about him like he should be playing for the Saskatchewan Roughriders or something. It is absolutely mind-blowing how people talk about Dak Prescott.
I think what frustrates me is that you guys are saying really smart things. When Fitz started his comment with, and people in my mentions, and then I got so excited to be like, we need to have an intervention about Fitz reading his mentions. And then you guys said smart things, and I'm like, now I don't know if I can give my ribbing.
Once in a while now, I'm trying to get better about. I'm trying to get better about responding.
A guy who casually like that says, and what people say in my mentions does not read them every once in a while.
No, I've gotten the spot like where I can finally get away from Twitter enough. I did, call somebody an effing moron on Twitter the other day. That's when I finally.
I got that. I got your tweet to me. Yeah, that was really nice. I appreciate that.
Hey, you know what, Frank? Be smarter. That's all. Tweet me smarter stuff, and I won't have to drop F-bombs. All right, real quick. Do you think? So you think Micah is a year away from any conversation? Is there anything? Do either of you believe that Dak Prescott is not the quarterback of the Cowboys starting next season?
I think it's not a guarantee. I would say it's like 70% that Dak is the quarterback of the Cowboys in 2025. So I still think they are the most likely option. But I also think that this season is going to tell us, like, what goes right this season, what goes wrong this season, and then how does Dak, with his leverage, make a decision based on that of what he wants. I don't think that the Cowboys are going to say they don't want him. The question is, do they want him for $60 million or do they want him at $40 million? Because wanting him at $40 million, is that truly wanting him? But I think it is more likely that Dak plays for the Cowboys than anyone else. I don't think it is anywhere close to a guarantee. And as a New York resident who has worked with Dak and enjoys working with him, I would like him to play for the Giants or Jets so that he could be local again.
I'll put my percentage higher than Jori's. I don't know exactly what it is. Well, acknowledging it's not guaranteed, but again, I just look at the history quarterbacks never hitting the open market and the way we talk about, oh, this quarterback's going to change teams, and they never do. And this Cowboy is going to change teams, and they never do. And I just think the same thing's going to happen. And my one prediction is Dak will sign a contract. They'll have everybody freaking out about how much it is.
Yeah, you're right. It's just not going to be with the Cowboys. I will go on record. I think Dak's going to win the NFL MVP this year. I think the Cowboys are going to have an absolutely epic regular season. They will probably fail in the playoffs because most teams do. And by the way, I'm not going to let one game outweigh an entire regular season. Dak hits the open market. I don't know if it's, I've said before, I think it's the Raiders. It could be the Giants. It could be anybody. Somebody is going to back up the truck and they're going to give historic guarantees to Dak and they're going to be questioned for it. And I, for one, am not going to question that because when you have a quarterback, at least you have a chance. We're going to we got to pay bills. Like, we got to be able to pay Dak if we ever want him to be on here. So we're going to pay some bills.
Dak's going to join Inside Coverage next year. We're going to pay him $70 million a year.
We'll talk to the bosses about that. I don't think that works with our growth numbers. All right. Jori's been all over the country. We'll get an update from some of her best spots. We'll do it next. All right, Jori has been everywhere on her training camp tour. Frank and I have been sitting back reading her work, and it has been incredible. Let's start with the Patriots, Jori, because you had the chance to visit the Patriots, all eyes on Drake Maye. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting going there and seeing that, look, Drake Maye is clearly the Patriots' vision for their future. I don't think he's their Patriots' vision for their present. And by present, I mean the next month or so. Like, when you play the Bengals, when you play the Niners, when you play the Jets, this team is not set up to support Drake Maye. And I'm going to have a story coming next week about when is a rookie quarterback ready and when is a team ready to support the quarterback. But I talked to Elliott Wolf. I talked to head coach Gerard Mayo, offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, the quarterback's coach T.C. McCartney, as well as players. And Jacoby Brissett has what they call a toolbox of ways to protect himself, of ways to work within this offense, which, by the way, he's been in this system before, ways to understand what to do with the defense, and ways to also account for, hey, this offensive line is not really set up to protect a quarterback right now, in my opinion. And so what can you do about that? And I think that it would be irresponsible for the Patriots to start Drake Maye in week 1. I think that we get so excited about this. Hey, we need to get this guy out there as soon as possible. And there are executives in the league and coaches in the league who I talked to who said, hey, what you need to do is, 1, put them out there because live action reps is the quickest way to learn. And 2, you could take things off their plates. You can take things off their protection. I will note this is kind of an interesting nugget. I talked to center David Andrews as well as Bailey Zappi, who's no longer with the Patriots, but he was kind of going through training camp with them. And for a long time, the Patriots had been a system where the quarterback was in charge of all the protections and all of the calls. Now their current system, they have their center in charge of the calls. The quarterback can trump the center at any point, but it really is the center. And so David Andrews, a veteran, can take some of that stuff off his plate. But I think even when you look at Jacoby Brissett's shoulder injury and say, well, Jacoby might be hurt, will he still be the right guy? To me, that injury is even more of a case for why you don't put Drake Maye out there, because when you look at what the offensive line was doing, or really what they were not doing on that play, I don't want my prime draft capital rookie before he's really gotten this experience to be out there with that offensive line. And the last thing I'll say is, yes, Bo Nix is going to start in Denver. Yes, Jaden Daniels is going to start in Washington. They have double and triple the amount of college starts that Drake Maye has. And so this is not the same degree of like mental reps that these guys are playing with. I mean, I want to hear what you guys think, because I know our colleague Charles McDonald totally disagrees with me on this, but I do not think the Patriots should start Drake Maye at least for the first month of the season.
I'm very interested because me, Charles, and Fitz talked about this last week and how many starts does Drake Maye get. And I think, something you said just now, it's not responsible to start him week 1. Well, is it more responsible in week 10? Is it more because the team's not getting better. They stink. They're bad. Like, this Patriots team, really, truly, honestly, like, I don't think they're going 0-17, but I don't know that they're not going 0-17, honestly. So when you get to, the point I made last week, and I wonder what you think about it, they're going to get to a point like Halloween when they're 0-7 or 1-6 or whatever it is. Can they possibly still be patient enough to be like, well, we're losing every week by 20 points, but we got to keep the kid in the garage because we're going to ruin him? I don't think they can. I think at some point that this team, unless they surprise everybody, and the Patriots fans, if they're 5-2 in October, please play us back because I don't see it coming. If they are like 1-6, I just can't see Jared Mayo saying, well, yeah, we're just going to go 1-16 this year and keep the kid on the bench. So I guess the question back to you, Jori, is when would it be responsible? There are no soft spots in the schedule. The schedule is really, really tough from beginning to end. When is it responsible to start Drake Maye, if at all, this season?
There are a lot of people around the league who believe that offensive line play over the first month is just not going to be what it's going to be later in the season. It takes time to gel together. And with all of the restrictions on training, on preseason, on all of these things, the 5 working as one in a unit, they're just not going to be able to do it at the beginning of the season. And so what I would want to do if I was the Patriots is say, okay, our offensive line is not going to be ready week 1. What about week 2? What about week 3? Are they getting better? Or are they getting worse? Are they getting more injured? Or are they getting to sort of understand what they can and can't do and how to operate within those confines? And based off that, can we understand what we need to do to support Drake, whether that's always having extra guys, like bringing the tight ends in, et cetera. And so I think that you have that data point of what you're going to do. I do think you have to be realistic about, is it responsible for Drake? I also think that the Patriots just failed with Mac Jones in terms of creating a franchise quarterback. It's so funny. I started my training camp tour in Green Bay, and I was trying to understand, like, how were they so patient with Jordan Love? Obviously, it helps to have an MVP, but the other thing that's really helpful for the Green Bay Packers strategy is they don't have an owner. They're run by a lot of people, and to not have an owner and to have the head coach and the general manager be able to be patient is a huge upside, and it's just like such an advantage in this league, in my opinion. And so, I don't think Robert Kraft's going to be so excited about losing, but can you try and sell Robert Kraft on, we got to do this, and if you let us do it this year, we get a high draft pick, like next year we will be competitive. I'm not saying that they will do that, but I think that that is probably the best if they want to be relevant in the next 5 to 10 years.
That's why I think, Jori, the relationship between Robert Kraft and Jerod Mayo is an important part of this conversation, right? You've hired a coach that you had a lot of belief in as a human being, somebody that's been around the organization and somebody that is an owner you believe can take your franchise where they need to go. And I think that buys you a little bit of grace, right? We talk all the time about benefit of the doubt. Robert Kraft has already given that to Jerod Mayo by simply making him the person that replaces Belichick. That's already tough enough. So you got to feel like if there's anybody in the world that can go to Kraft and say, hey, this is what's best for us long term, and actually have the owner's ear on that, it's Mayo. I think that's why the coaching hire is really significant to the development process of Drake Maye, because I'll go back to what we saw even in the patience that was given in the beginning for Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch with the 49ers. They had, at the time, what was unprecedented was 6-year deals. Nobody did that. And they had some sort of longevity established. So it allowed them to come in and establish a culture that we always hear about. Well, Jerod Mayo is doing that with New England now with just a little sprinkle of the benefit of the doubt that comes from his pre-existing relationship with ownership. I think that has to be an important part of how they analyze what to do with Drake Maye. Because I frankly, if I'm a Patriots fan, and I've said this repeatedly, I can win 3 games or I can win 6 games. I might as well win 3 and just go out and get myself the first pick in the draft. If I'm going to do that, then I might as well protect Drake Maye the best I can and allow the quarterback room to sort of help him develop how it works being a pro, how to become a pro in every possible way. So I want to trust the relationship allows more grace and patience with Drake Maye. I don't know if that's true, but that's at least what is in my mind.
Yeah, ironically, I think one of the worst things that happened to the Patriots in the last month is how good Drake Maye looked in the preseason, because that is going to make it more difficult. And I was really surprised to see Jerod Mayo say this week that Drake outplayed Jacoby in the preseason, because that was not what people were telling me last week. And it's not that Drake was a worse player. Yes, he has more arm talent. Yes, he has a much higher ceiling than Jacoby Brissett, but they did not feel like the body of work and all of the different things it takes with the operation to be the quarterback, to understand the defenses, all of that Drake was further ahead. And so I was pretty surprised to see Jerod Mayo this week say that Drake outplayed Jacoby. And I think that that's probably something that you would rather say like in 6 weeks.
And there is a lot that goes on with that as far as like training camp practices that we don't see 100% and all that. But just in the preseason, not only the worst thing that could have happened to them was Drake Maye being good, it was Jacoby Brissett being absolutely awful. His quarterback rating this preseason, I believe, was like 14. I like something where like if he would have thrown incomplete every single pass, it would have been better than what he put on film. So the one thing you talked about, Fitz, was culture and, building that. And it's not going to be easy to build that when you're playing a quarterback who everybody knows shouldn't be starting if they start Jacoby Brissett. Everybody's going to look around and say, we're not playing our best quarterback. We're not even trying to win. Like that makes it hard. It makes it hard to then massage a locker room where everybody knows. Like, look, we all know. We've been around NFL guys long enough. We know the players know everything. They understand Drake Maye is the better quarterback. He gives us the best chance to win, and we're not playing this guy. That's a hard sell to them, and it's hard to build a culture when, again, this is let's say 3. you go 3-14 with Jacoby Brissett starting all year when you know that you didn't start your best quarterback. That's something that lingers over seasons. I really do believe that. You talk about, like Jonathan Gannon late last season with the Cardinals. They won a game late in the year against the Philadelphia Eagles. I believe that helps your culture. I believe that helps people buy in. It's hard to buy in when you are the worst team in football, which I think they will be, and you didn't start your best quarterback. That's a part of this equation too, in my mind.
I do want us to give Jacoby Brissett week 1 against the Bengals and then make this decision, because I think that what people do in the preseason can be misleading. I'm not saying that people struggling can be misleading, but like, we don't know that Drake Maye can do what he did in the regular season, in the preseason, but I don't know.
But I guess the question is, Jori, what happens if he's the same in week 1? Then you start with Drake Maye in week 2.
It gets complicated.
All of a sudden, it's like at some point,
The crazy thing is, here's the strategy I would like them to take, although no one in their right mind is going to be able to justify it. Put Joe Milton out there. Let him develop as a backup.
Wow.
Save Drake Maye.
But if he plays well, Jori, oh my God, the can of worms.
He's not going to play responsibly, but he's going to have like great highlights and then great messes. And like, it will be fun. It'll give people reasons to come to the games. You can't do that because you can't do that from like a Drake Maye leadership standpoint. But that's, to me, what I would feel most comfortable with, because like, you want to develop your backup, you want to get him reps. And Drake Maye, I don't know that he needs those in the same way. Like, how valuable are your reps going to be if you're just like have no time? I talked to a GM in the last few weeks he was pretty much pointing toward the Patriots situation. He said the quickest way to ruin the confidence of a quarterback and just ruin a quarterback's career is to have him get hit all the time.
Yep.
And that's what should be happening to Drake Maye if he's out
I just think you guys are both, and Charles too, I think everybody is underestimating the reality of we're 0-7 and we're just going to keep Drake Maye on the bench. I just don't think that's going to I just don't think it's realistic.
I don't think there's anybody left on this roster in 2 years other than Drake Maye. Like most of New England is like, it's just, these guys are not going to be on this team. So I hear you that it's bad for culture, but is that going to matter in a year or two? Because I feel like this offseason, we're going to see another 20 guys shifted, and the next offseason, another 20 guys shifted. We'll end up with a totally different looking football team.
Yeah, it's hard because I do think that winning solves and band-aids a lot of problems in the NFL. But I was talking to someone who's pretty close involved with the Patriots in the last couple of weeks, who really said, like, we just need to get through this year and then get to next year. And so I think the question is, can they feel that way when the pressure is on in October? Now, this is not like a Jerod Mayo job security situation in October. Like, he's going to have a little bit of a run, but I do think that you need to like take Robert Kraft and be like, hey, Robert, that business venture, that philanthropic thing, that foundation, like, look how many things you can go do with that. Like, go take like a 3-month sabbatical, come back next year. Like, that's what they need to do. Team. Like, diversified sources of happiness for Robert Kraft. That's what we need this year.
One thing I will say though, I mean, we all agree that like, yeah, Jerod Mayo's probably not going to take the fall for this, but it does get dicey when you do have a really, really, really bad record. Ask Hugh Jackson. Hugh Jackson was basically sold the bag of goods that, hey, you have all the security in the world. We know we're tanking. We know this. Well, he got fired after going 3-36 or whatever his record was with Cleveland. If you do have a truly terrible season, like a 1-2 win type of season, all of a sudden it gets a little, I don't know that necessarily Robert Kraft, you're going to hear a lot of stuff about Jerod Mayo's not the right guy. It's not just that you had a bad quarterback, but is this the right guy? And I don't know that Jerod Mayo would feel that confident in his job security if you do have one of those horrific type of seasons, which is truly
Kraft
on the table for the
Kraft
Patriots.
isn't going to take the egg on his face of being like, I got rid of Belichick, and now after 1 year, I got to fire the guy that I replaced him with, right? Like, there's too much ownership ego in that.
But it's also, do you just bring back a guy who replaced a legend, the greatest coach of all time, and went 2-15? Like, I'm just saying that there are paths here where Jerod Mayo feels the heat.
I think Jerod Mayo's job security will only be in question if the defense looks absolutely terrible. I think that if the defense looks respectable and the offense is a work in progress, then he should have line. I also think he gets at least 2 years. He should get 3, but he gets at least 2 years.
3 or 4. I agree.
No.
Yeah.
Now you planted the seed, and all I can think is that the Patriots go 0-17. They fire Mayo and they bring back Belichick, and Belichick suddenly has a quarterback again. All right,
Brady out of retirement. Let's just do this.
You bring him out of retirement. Belichick all of a sudden comes in. He's got his quarterback. He rebuilds the Patriots.
They're like, we just needed to get Bill out of here so we could actually draft the quarterback we wanted without him interfering.
It's a perfect plan. All right, speaking of coaches that could be on the hot seat, Frank's had some pretty spicy takes on the Eagles at times and what we could be seeing for Nick Sirianni. You went and saw the Eagles up close and personal, Jori. How'd they look?
The Eagles look good. I think it's interesting. Their offense is definitely way ahead of their defense. I think that they just have such a stacked, they have a very top-heavy roster, but to have Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, now you had Saquon Barkley, you had Jahan Dotson, which I'm not saying Jahan Dotson is like a wide receiver 1, but for a wide receiver 3, that's pretty freaking impressive. They just have so much talent. The real question, obviously, on the offense will be, without Jason Kelce, how strong is that offensive line? But they still have a lot of other guys who have been in that building for a long time. I think that this offense should be a problem, but I don't know about their defense. One of the interesting things from training camp practice was that Jalen Hurts did not throw an interception in team drills the entirety of training camp until the very last day when I was there. He kind of misjudged an in-cut route. And Darius Slay picked him off, and Slay was like, I was beating him. And Jalen's like, it was about time. And I think that about time was good for several reasons. One, I had someone from the coaching staff who was like, because I had asked a couple of people, I'm like, is that an issue? I'm not saying you want interceptions, but to me, if you don't have things to learn from in training camp, you're going to be making these mistakes in October. And the person told me, if they were being passive, that's one thing. He wasn't being passive, but then we kind of agreed afterwards, it's probably good that he had an interception. You don't really want to go into the season with that kind of streak. But I think it also is reflective of maybe Vic Fangio is the right defensive coordinator. Maybe he does have a lot of ways that he can sort of bring this defense to the next level. But it's a young defense, and because of how much they paid their offense, they have a lot of people who are just not quite there yet on defense. And it'll be interesting to see how much opponents take advantage of that in the first month of the season.
I think that of all the week one, and I love all the week one games because we learn so much, and it's like Christmas because we unwrap all these gifts. We don't know what's coming. Of all the week one games, though, that I'm probably going to be paying the most attention to because I think we're going to learn the most about both teams, it's the Eagles-Packers game. I don't know which way. I don't know what to make of that game because the Eagles could come out and just look like the team that started 10-1 last year, that made a Super Bowl 2 years ago. Or what are they going to look like, the team that got absolutely embarrassed by the Buccaneers in the wild card game? I don't know. I just don't know about the Eagles. I keep going back and forth, and I'm still stuck with them where I just don't know what to make of them. Just because, not because their roster isn't good, because it is. Not because I don't trust Fangio. I do, although it does worry me a little bit how Dolphins players ripped him on the way out, like he couldn't connect with them. Well, that, like you said, they got a young defense. Can he connect with this Eagles defense? Kellen Moore, we've talked about, is Kellen Moore really the guy that people stay up late at night worrying about Fitz? No, usually not. So I don't know if everything's been fixed with the Eagles, but I know that they have a lot of talent. But it's one of those, again, I have no idea what to make of the Eagles. Sirianni could be in real trouble in October, or they could be 6-0. I just have no idea which way this is going, and I think we're going to learn a lot week one based on how they look against the Packers in Brazil.
There's one thing that I think we've undersold in the new version of the Eagles with Kelce being gone, and that's the brotherly shove. If you look back over the last couple of years, what was the average on about 93% success rate? Think about how many drives were converted and extended thanks to a third or fourth and short conversion on a brotherly shove. That play was so powerful, so impactful that there was conversation every week about whether the league should outlaw it because it extended drives for the Eagles. Without Kelce in the middle, can they execute the same level of brotherly shove? And if the answer is no, while that may seem insignificant right now when we're talking, if you're talking about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 drives over the course of the year even that suddenly result in punts instead of conversions that lead to points, that's a big difference. In the slim margins of the modern NFL, I am genuinely curious week one, the first time that the Eagles run brotherly shove, I think there's a moment where we all got to stop. You put your drink down and you watch it. Is this as unstoppable with somebody else giving the ball to Jalen Hurts? Because if the answer to that is no, then I honestly think that's 1 or 2 game difference in the standings for the Eagles by the end of the year, which is in that division substantial.
I think it's a great point, Fitz, but I think that there are 3 things that were key to the brotherly shove working, which, can we call it the tush push? I'm done with this brotherly shove situation.
Sure. Tush push is a line dance, Jori. You wouldn't know this, but the tush push is a country music line dance. So every time, and it involves this little tush wiggle thing. So every time people call it the tush push, all I can do is imagining the Eagles team at a dive country bar, all swiggling their hips around. So go ahead.
It happens. Anyway, I think 3 things were key to this play working, 2 of which the Eagles still have. Obviously, they no longer have Jason Kelce, who really understood how to do that play. They do still have Jalen Hurts, who we've seen those videos of him working out and how much he can bench, et cetera, et cetera.
9,000 pounds.
Exactly. When you can squat that is a really big part. And it's not like he all of a sudden has a Jori weight person in front of him. Like, he still has a massive person in front of him who is going to be helping the push, even if not the exact technique. And the last part of that is that, so my understanding of what this offense will look like this year is that Kellen Moore will really be putting his flavor on the passing game, but the run game will be a lot more what we've expected from the Eagles in the past. And that is in large part because Jeff Stoutland, their offensive line coach, is also their run game coordinator. And so I think a lot of the things with the offensive line schemes, with the blocking schemes, and with the run game, they didn't really lose the continuity there in terms of the teaching. And oh, by the way, all of these guys around him were learning with Jason there. And so I think that having Jeff Stoutland, who is, if he's not the best offensive line coach in the league, he's probably top 2. I think he's probably 1. But I think having that will allow him to still understand. Like, I think the team will still understand what they need to do to get that play. I'm not saying they'll have the same success rate, but I expect a little bit of a drop-off more than a lot. And also, by the way, part of the idea with some of this is, well, what are the other options? And I think when you have Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley on the field together, you constantly have to be on alert of what is the offense going to do. And so I think that having a more explosive run threat or a more challenging run threat is also going to help that play.
All right, we're going to take a second and look up tush push videos, and then we're going to figure out who's on the hot seat. How hot are some of the seats from around the league? We'll do that after we pay some bills. Okay, it's never too early coming into the season to look at hot seat lists. Now, before we do any of this, let's look straight at the camera and make a disclaimer here. Nobody on this show is ever rooting for anybody in the league to ever lose their jobs. And whether we're talking about cut down day a couple of days ago, which was tragic for people that have fought their whole life to try and get into the league, or we're talking about the hot seat, and not just how it impacts head coaches, but everybody in an organization, some people you've never even heard of and how they feed their families. We never want to root for anyone to lose their job. That being said, as we come into the season, certainly there are franchises that have a seat that's a little hotter than others. So I figured that we'd take a look at some of these, maybe rank them. Frank, obviously, you've got some hot seat tiers going here. Let's take a look at some of these and figure out what we think for maybe an order of least to most hot on some of these, but we'll start as we go through them and we'll figure out kind of how to do this. So let's start with the one Mike McCarthy, because this is going to be a disagreement on the show, I can guarantee you. How hot? Lukewarm, hot, or seats on fire? Like hot, 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 hot. Frank, where do you have Mike McCarthy?
I think this is kind of a hot seat, hot take, but I don't think McCarthy is really that hot on the hot seat. He's more lukewarm because for all we talk about Jerry Jones, like he just fires guys left and right. Jerry Jones is like the most patient owner in the NFL other than the Steelers owner when it comes to firing coaches. I think he's only fired one coach in like the last 14 years, and it was Wade Phillips in the middle of the year or something like that. Since then, it was Jason Garrett the one time.
Which Jason Garrett technically was not fired. His contract expired and was not renewed.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like Jerry's just firing his like we act like it. We're like, oh, Jerry's firing Mike McCarthy at halftime of this Packers game. He doesn't operate that way. So, but I do think he's got to be on this list because if the Cowboys struggle, if they miss the playoffs, which they could, I don't think they will, but they could, then I think it would almost be, you'd almost have to make a move. Like he just paid a bunch of money to CeeDee Lamb. He might pay a bunch of money to Dak Prescott. You can't even make the playoffs right now. I think Mike McCarthy might be in trouble, but not because they go to the second round and they lose to the Lions or something in a 4-point game. I don't think he'd get fired then, even though every single person in America would be like, that's it. McCarthy didn't make a Super Bowl. He's fired. I don't think he's on that hot of a seat. I don't think either one of us here to agree with that either.
I think there are two major factors that work against Mike McCarthy. The first is Jerry Jones didn't need someone when he hired Mike McCarthy who could win in the regular season. Jason Garrett could get a team to play very well in the regular season. He could get them to win the division every year in a pretty competitive division with the Eagles. He had that. He wanted someone who could help break this playoff drought, who had been to the Super Bowl and could take it back. And now that's been 2020, 2021, 2, 3. We're on year 5 of that. And 4 of those years, he's had a healthy enough roster that they should have been able to advance, and they have not made it back to the Super Bowl or even the NFC Championship game for an appearance. I really think that they need to get to a conference championship game for them to feel good about this season. Now, the other thing is that while Jerry is not rushing to fire coaches, I think he was intentional about leaving Mike on the final year of his deal this year. And I also think that Jerry cares a lot about how he can sell this to the fan base because Jerry is the general manager and the team owner. And so while the general manager said this year, I want to keep McCarthy because they've won 12 games the last 3 years, Jerry, the team owner, is going to be well aware throughout this season that Bill Belichick is waiting and that he would absolutely love for that. Now, there are still questions we could ask ourselves about whether they would work well together. I think we all remember that story where Jerry kept trying to ensure me, even when I wasn't really asking, that they could work well together. But I do think that Jori is going to start to make comments late in the season, or at least in the playoffs, if Mike doesn't do what he wants him to do, about like, well, I know that Bill would love to come play here, let's come coach here. And so I think that that is a legitimate factor that Jori is going to factor in.
So would you say lukewarm, hot, or seats on fire?
I would say, what's between lukewarm and hot? Warm?
Warm? Okay.
Warm. Not
seat,
lukewarm,
warm.
warm.
You can't sell that warm seat post to the editors. I'll tell you that. Like, he's on the warm seat.
I'll say lukewarm. I'll say lukewarm. They won 12 games the last 3 years.
Yeah, I know.
I thought we were going to have a heated debate on this, but we all agree. Like, I wouldn't even put him on the list. Like, the chances of
Fitz, he's got to be on the list.
Look,
if you're not putting him on the list, he would have gotten an extension after.
If the Cowboys implode,
did you watch the game against the Packers?
Of course, we all did. We all saw the game against the Packers, and if the
yet
Cowboys,
you don't think he's even on the list?
No, I just because Jori is wildly patient. Like, if he didn't get fired last year for the Packers debacle, what's he going to get fired for this year? Yeah, if the Packers
Fitz, going
implode,
back to what
then
you said earlier on the show, you're telling me you think that Dak is going to not. Oh, you think there's no Dak, but McCarthy is staying?
Yes, I think McCarthy is the coach of a different quarterback next year. Yes, I think Dak is choosing his way out. The most important part of it, like, look, I've had the chance in my career to work a pretty good amount with Stephen A. Stephen A. has figured out how to make money, and he makes money by talking about the Cowboys. So unfortunately, because the Cowboys and everything Dallas related becomes a social media phenomenon for ESPN, we've all been sucked into this tornado of just bad takes around the Cowboys. And it just happens over and over and over again. Like, I think Frank made a really important point. Jerry Jones is not an impatient owner by any stretch of the imagination. So, like, at what point do we recalibrate the way we look at the Cowboys for who they are now, not for who Jerry Jones was in the 90s? Like, I'm different than I was in the 90s. Like, I think we all evolve in this process. Jerry Jones, pretty patient. Mike McCarthy's going to turn around and have a big year. I don't think Dallas is going to fall off the cliff. If the Cowboys suddenly win 6 games, yes, he's going to get fired. But right now, is there any reason for me to think that his seat's even lukewarm? No, I think, frankly, the Cowboys could go to the playoffs, lose a playoff game, and Mike McCarthy would still come back.
Wow.
I think
do
McCarthy's
not agree with that.
Ooh.
Wow.
And I also think that you have to remember, which games is Mike McCarthy winning? Because there's only so many times you can beat the Commanders and Giants and still get to keep your job. You lost last year. You can't beat San Francisco. If you're never going to beat San Francisco, you're not going to be able to advance to the NFC title game.
Yeah, but we could use that same argument for the Bills.
San Francisco, Miami,
so do we fire Sean
Buffalo.
McDermott because he can't beat the Chiefs?
People want to fire Sean McDermott.
Yeah, and the Bills beat the Cowboys last year. San Francisco, Miami, Buffalo, Green Bay. There were just all these teams that were better than the Cowboys. Green Bay, they just couldn't beat any of them. You have to be able to beat the teams that are better than you, especially the ones in your conference, if you want to keep doing this.
Yeah,
Jerry Jones did not hire him to win 12 games. He hired him to win playoff games.
But again, I'll use the same argument then. Like, are we going to freak out about Josh Allen and Sean McDermott if they again lose to the Chiefs? Or do we just step back and say, man, the Chiefs are really good? Like, we seem to apply benefit of the doubt to franchises without the star on their helmet that we don't apply to the Cowboys.
Patrick Mahomes and Jordan Love should not be put on the same situation in the playoffs last year.
But it doesn't change the inevitability of what you're facing every year. Like, if the Cowboys go in and lose in the playoffs to a team like the Lions that go on to win the Super Bowl, I'm not going to let's just say that happens. I'm not going to turn around and fire my coach because he lost to the eventual Super Bowl champions. It doesn't make any sense to me. If you were going to fire him for losing an inexcusable playoff game where your team came out flat and you have no reason to understand why your talent didn't live up to expectation, you could have done that 7 months ago. But he didn't do that. So, like, what's suddenly going to happen this year that's the special sauce that will get a different result out of Jerry?
I think that Josh Allen has played in 10 playoff games and won 5 of them, and Dak's played in 7 and won 2 of them. And so I do think that there's a difference there.
It's contextual here because Cowboys make the playoffs and lose a playoff game. Well, is it the kind of Eagles situation where you barely make the playoffs, you limp in and you get blown out by the NFC South champs? Or is it, like you said, Fitz, do they lose a close game to the Lions after winning the NFC East championship? Like, there's a lot of contextuality between how you lose in the playoffs. I think that would determine whether Jerry might be nudged. Because I think what you said, what changes? Like, this happened 7 months ago and he didn't fire the guy. What would change? It would just be the compilation at that point. Like, again, really, Mike, you didn't have your team ready against the Packers last year. You didn't have them ready against the Falcons this year. I think that it would pile up a little bit. Let me be
old man on the block, and Frank will remember this. How did that work for Marty Schottenheimer and the Chargers? All he did was win constantly, but he couldn't win in the playoffs. The Chargers fired him. How did that work out?
No, that was that was the worst firing in NFL history. They go 14-2 and you fire your coach. Like that's dumb. I'm not even saying I
But they
agree
did it because he couldn't win in the playoffs.
I think
it was the same argument.
I will say this. If you did a blind resume test of all NFL head coaches, I think everybody would agree Mike McCarthy is the most underrated head coach in the NFL. Like he gets so much grief for a guy who he does have a Super Bowl ring. His winning percentage is like 60 something. I mean, he's really, really underrated. I agree with everything you said, but at some point, just the pressure of not making it, like Jori talked about, they paid him to win playoff games. And if you don't do that, eventually Jerry's going to say, I know that something needs to change. And the easiest thing to change is Mike McCarthy, and let's go and see if Bill Belichick's available or whatever.
Well, yeah, so I want to ask both
is.
of you. Do you guys think it's more likely in the next 5 years that the Cowboys could win the Super Bowl or at least even get to the NFC title game with Bill Belichick as coach or Mike McCarthy as coach?
Ooh, probably McCarthy, because Belichick would come in and make personnel changes. That's a weird way to answer that question, I guess.
Right, I'm not sure it's Belichick, but I think that is the question that Jerry and Steven are going to be asking themselves.
Right.
I think, and this is like, people say this is a loser's mentality all the time. I think it's better to be lucky than good. And to win a Super Bowl, everything has to break right for you. So I just like not winning a Super Bowl doesn't to me mean that the sky's falling. Like I use Buffalo as a good example.
What about
or the
never
Steelers.
getting past the divisional round or beating the teams that are the teams you have to win?
But there were Steelers fans a few years ago that were like, man, Tomlin didn't get enough out of Big Ben. Like, we got to get a new coach.
There are Steelers fans today that think Mike Tomlin should be fired. There's just, some of the weirdest people in the world. Yeah.
Where's it end? Like, I mean, 12 wins, 3 straight years. I'm not getting rid of a coach. I'm not going to let a body of work be outweighed by one game. To me, I can't let one game outweigh the fact that consistently 12-4, 12-5 in the modern NFL. That's damn good. That's not just good. That's damn good. And if you're winning 12 games 3 years in a row, and I think it'll be at least 4 years in a row now, I have a hard time seeing that coach be let go because one game didn't go your way, and never know who that game is against. Like, it depends. If you lose a home game in the playoffs to a team that's absolutely pathetic, that's probably different than losing a road game in the playoffs to a juggernaut that goes on to win the Super Bowl.
I think last year they lost a home game in the playoffs to the 7th seed, and they were the only ones who lost at home in that round.
Yeah, but we turned
and
around
it was
and we're like,
not close.
we've used
the
that
team
as a
wasn't
reason.
pathetic, but
We've used that as a reason that Jordan Love is unstoppable all of a sudden. It's like, look at what Jordan Love did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
that is true. I think that you also just need to think is not all 12 games are created equally. I understand that in the playoffs, a win is a win, but I think that the type of wins you have in the regular season are relevant when you get to the playoffs, and I think they need to be better teams this year.
All right, we'll continue to. I thought it wasn't going to be heated. Then it was. Let's go to the next one. Robert Saleh on the list, obviously Jets head coach. I've said repeatedly to Frank, the first time that the Jets organization handles chaos, will be the next time, because they never do. So Robert Saleh, how hot is his seat, Jori?
I think his seat is hot. I don't think it's scalding, but I think it's hot. And I think it's that on one hand, you can say if the Aaron Rodgers decision doesn't work out, that's a Joe Douglas move, not a Robert Saleh move. And maybe he doesn't deserve for it to be hot in the sense that the defense has not only been very good, but also stayed very motivated, even with all the crazy quarterback stuff. I think what hurts Robert Saleh is the way he's handled some of the quarterback stuff. I talked about this a lot last year when he was continuing to act like nothing was wrong with Zach Wilson, and when he was continuing to say, well, maybe everyone else around him needs to play better. I think that was really challenging for the locker room. And I think that how he goes about messaging this year, externally and internally, I think both matter. Like, I have so many general managers and execs and coaches and agents who tell me the coaches are using their media sessions to send messages to the locker room. Like, that is a thing. And when he was saying last year that it wasn't Zach, it was the people around him, or that it was not only Zach, I think that was really challenging. So I think his seat is hot, but I also think that they have a lot of talent. So I think they should be able to overcome a hot seat.
I think Jori's talked me off of scalding onto maybe just hot, but I do think, let's put it this way. I think that of all the coaches in the NFL, including Nick Sirianni, nobody needs a better hot start than Robert Saleh. Because if this team gets off to a bad start, he's gone. Like, they have so much invested in this one season. It's rare to see this in the NFL.
You think he'd be gone in the middle of the season?
I do. They're 2-5. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, I'm not talking about you need to be 7-0, but if they're 3-4 even, I think there's going to be a lot of chatter of we're all in on this season. You don't see that in the modern NFL very often, where it is 100% about 2024, 2025. Everything's going to change one way or another, right? We know that. And I think that they're so invested in this one season that I think ownership, unless there's an Aaron Rodgers injury or something, they're going to say, well, you got the quarterback now and you're 2-5. Something's got to change. We're all in on this season. We can't afford to just go 8-9 this year and then everything changes. I think that he's under the most pressure early in the season to get off to a good start. I think they're going to get off to a good start. I think they're going to be a very good football team, but I don't think there's not another coach in the NFL I would say needs a hot start more than Robert Saleh, just because I don't know that he could survive a really, really bad start to the season.
Well, and it's interesting because going back to their mini camp situation where Aaron Rodgers decided to go to Egypt rather than to come to practice, and Robert Saleh said he is an unexcused absence. I appreciate what Saleh was doing in terms of the message he's sending to the team that no one is bigger than the team. From a job security standpoint, maybe he should want to view Aaron Rodgers as bigger than the team, because I think that that is how the Jets organization is operating. So I think that if Aaron is upset at Saleh, that will hurt his chances of sticking around. But when you look at their schedule, I mean, the Jets against the Niners week 1, I think that is actually going to be a really good game, because even though the Niners are fantastic, the Jets defense is so good. You've got Aaron Rodgers. Like, I think that they are going to be matched up pretty evenly.
And maybe no Trent Williams, maybe no Brandon Ayuk.
Brandon Ayuk. We do this every year with the Niners. Let's stop pretending that their holdouts mean anything. Literally, they always say they always get their money.
Jori is like, wow.
You're right, though.
Yeah, you are.
The Niners have more holdouts every year than the rest of the league combined, and no one goes anywhere. So I'm open.
And this show, by the way, called it that he would be back with the 49ers. All three of us agreed on that. Go ahead, Jori.
No. I think Frank was pretty sure he was going to the Steelers, right?
At some point, yeah, I was. But then you realize after a while that the 49ers absolutely played the Steelers. The Steelers.
Never mind that Jori and I were right. Jori and I were convinced that he was back.
Real quick, I'll give you my 30-second spiel here that if I was the Steelers, I would be pissed off because you got used. The 49ers clearly were not going into these trade talks genuinely. I think the Steelers went into it thinking, oh, we're trying to get a trade done. The 49ers went into it saying, let's set a market for Brandon Ayuk and use the Steelers as a pawn here. Like, that's what happened, right? Like, let's be honest. Let's be real. I don't think they ever intended to trade Brandon Ayuk. They just wanted somebody else to set the market so they could go back to Brandon Ayuk's people. And if I was the Steelers, I'd be like, that's so unprofessional and rude and terrible that I would never deal with the 49ers ever again.
And Brandon Ayuk was still, like, chilling at practice every day. He wasn't practicing, but he was in meetings and all that. Like, he wasn't disappearing. He was holding in, not holding out. Going back to the Jets, I do think that whether or not they beat the 49ers, I think they'll be competitive. Aaron Rodgers is going to be pretty fired up about getting back for his first game.
It's going to be a great game.
And then the Jets play the Titans, the Patriots, and the Broncos the next 3 weeks. Even the Vikings week 4, I don't know how they're going to be, but the Jets should be fine to start the season from a schedule
But that's the thing, too. That's the thing, too, with Saleh. If they lose some of those games, if they lose to the Titans and they're 0-2, all of a sudden, every headline is going to be like, Saleh's got to go.
Especially because we got to acknowledge Aaron Rodgers has built his whole following, right? Like his weekly McAfee appearances and all of those things. Like, if things aren't going well, Aaron Rodgers is going to remind everybody exactly why they're not going well. That's why I think it's a
guys. Did anyone else think when
seat.
I'm not trying to get political, but this is relevant to the NFL, when RFK dropped out of the race, and I'm like, oh, so Aaron could have just like been along for the ride and still been ready for the regular season.
I'm back, guys.
Guys, the campaign went really well. All right. So, by the way, I think the seat's wildly on fire for Saleh. What about Doug Peterson and the Jags? Where are we on Doug Peterson, Frank?
I mean, once you start firing coordinators, you're next. And he fired his defensive coordinator. Surprised they brought back the offensive coordinator, but there's some, question about who's going to call plays and all that. You just handed your quarterback $55 million a year. Yeah, if they don't make the playoffs this year, I think the Doug Peterson thing would be over. So I'll say hot seat. And everything depends on how you do this season. I know we're saying this about every coach. Like, yeah, of course, if Doug Peterson goes 13-4, he's going to keep his job, and if he goes 4-13, he won't. But I think it's hot because just once you start firing coordinators, you're next.
Yeah, I think that how Trevor Lawrence performs will be the number one indicator of what Doug Peterson can do, because they just played him this massive deal, and if he still can't play at the level that they expect. And again, I think about this a lot with Caleb Williams coming into the league and all the high expectations. Like, think about what the Trevor Lawrence expectations were relative to where we are now. I think that Trevor needs to have a great season because I think that he has less talent around him. There are some moving parts. They have a new defensive coordinator. And so I think that if Doug can get Trevor back on track, and also, again, he was injured last year, so I think that's a factor, but I think those two are very closely tied together.
It's to me, anytime somebody gets paid, the organization tells you who they think the problem is. They don't think the problem is Trevor Lawrence. So if there's no playoffs for the Jags, then the problem is going to be Doug Peterson. Let me do this because there's obviously a few other coaches, but I'll ask you guys this. What coach do you think, Frank, is on the hottest seat of everybody going into this year? Again, not rooting for anybody to lose their job, but whose seat is the hottest?
I think it's Brian Daboll. I just think that the way last season went for the Giants, a lot of people sniping about his management style and how he's kind of an angry guy at times when things aren't going well. And the locker room, look, he did keep the locker room together the second half of the year. I was wondering about that. But I think that just looking at the prospects of the Giants this year, and they're probably not going to be very good, I think Brian Daboll is on the hottest seat. And if I had to pick one of these guys to be the first to go, it's probably Daboll.
Jori, what do you think?
I am fascinated by the Brian Daboll situation because I think that Hard Knocks influences public perception so much. And I came away from Hard Knocks, and in fairness, I only watched the first 3 episodes I need to finish. But 3 episodes of a TV show.
That's 3 episodes of TV for Jori. That's absolutely chef's kiss. That's amazing.
Claps. I came away from it being like Joe Shane made clear that he doesn't think Daniel Jones is the guy. And so if Daniel Jones doesn't work out, Joe Shane can then say, like, I told you I tried to get another quarterback. Give me a chance to get my own quarterback in there. A lot of people I talked to in the league came away saying Joe Shane didn't do what the owner asked him to do when he asked him to keep Saquon Barkley. And that is going to be reflected in their relationship going forward. Brian Daboll is a tricky one. I think that Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, it's unlikely to me that they will both be in their seats in 2025 unless they can kind of replicate what they got a couple of years ago. And also you look at the emotions that Brian Daboll had on the sideline last year, and those did draw some ire. I would say he's on the hottest seat, not necessarily because he's shown the most concern, but also like when you look at Dennis Allen, when you look at some of these other guys, even Doug Peterson, they're just not in markets where people are going to be talking about it as much. And maybe I'm just biased from my 7 years covering the Cowboys who have such a spotlight on them. But I do think that owners care what people say. And I do think that owners are aware of how much talk around there is. And I just don't think that all of ESPN is going to be talking about Dennis Allen. But I'll add on that terms of perception, if Sean Payton with Bo Nix in the first year can just go off and have a crazy season, I think that will hurt Dennis Allen because I do think that ownership is going to be aware of what they lost and what they're trying to get back.
I think as much as Sirianni is a big part of the hottest seat, to me, Eberflus still stands at the top of the hot seat mountain. And it's simply because you mentioned expectations.
That's fair.
Maybe we don't talk about the Bears, but we will this year because Caleb comes in, not just Caleb, but everything around Caleb. There are so many expectations for this offense to go out and be dynamic. Most importantly, it's not even about wins and losses. It's about Caleb playing at an incredibly high level. And I think CJ Stroud honestly changed the way that we have grace and patience, right or wrong, with rookie quarterbacks. So Caleb's going to come out. I'm not saying he has to be CJ Stroud-like, but if Caleb struggles and if Caleb looks like he's closer to being Mitchell Trubisky than he is to CJ Stroud, the immediate seat there that goes on fire to me is Eberflus. I'm a little surprised they kept him. I don't think they get a lot of grace with Eberflus. So I think Caleb Williams forces the eyeballs on that one to make that sort of part of my pick.
But what I'd ask you guys is, like, I look at what happened with Bryce Young last year just as much as I look at with CJ Stroud. And is it really in the best interest of a franchise to bring in a quarterback, bring in these new pieces, and have them go through so much change in their first 2 years? I don't think historically we have seen a lot of good results, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, Josh Rosen, all these type of guys, when a new coach comes in right after the quarterback gets in.
All right. You guys obviously follow us on social media. You know that. Make sure you rate, subscribe, review. We've got our own channel. You should know that too at this point. So that's great. And also, Jori talked to Roma Dunze yesterday, the full combo on Yahoo Sports YouTube channel. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel in general. You find a lot of great shows out there. And sign up for a Yahoo Fantasy League this year while you're at it. You can be automatically entered to win a chance for $1 million. All you got to do is see the details. Just go to yahoo.com/fantasy million. And then if you win the million, if you just want to, maybe give a little kickback to the show, we wouldn't turn you down. The season is almost here. We will be back next week launching everything that we've got for you throughout the course of the NFL season. Don't go anywhere. For Frank, for Jori, for Stone, our producer extraordinaire behind the scenes, I'm Jason Fitz. Thanks for hanging out with us.